I'm a completely self-taught photographer. I just started studying YouTube videos of great photographers on YouTube like Nick Page, Thomas Heaton, Peter McKinnon, all those big name photographers. And I literally self-taught myself with the help of their videos how to do photography. And I'm just kind of transitioning out of being a beginner photographer into maybe more of a bit of an intermediate photographer. These are the tips that I wish I had picked up a little sooner along the journey because it would have made things a lot easier. So if you're anything like me, you've been going through YouTube and trying to figure out the settings on your camera, trying to figure out how to operate your camera, how to get great light, how to bring that all together with composition and the right f-stop and shutter speed to make sure you get a great photo. And I know it can be a lot. And that's why I wanted to narrow down my 5 tips for beginning photographers on how to take your photography game to the next step. Step 1 is your histogram. And if you don't know what a histogram is, it's the little graph there that shows lines going up to the top and off to the left, maybe, and off to the right. And it lets you know the exposure, the actual exposure that the camera's taking in onto the sensor as compared to what you see on the LCD screen, because a lot of times there's a difference. And when you learn how to use the histogram, it helps make sure that you don't have those blown out places in your photo or those underexposed places, because you're looking for that histogram to be right in the middle without going above the top, because that would be clipping. If it's too far to the right, your picture is going to be blown out. If it's too far to the left, it's going to be underexposed. Now, for me, what I tend to do is try to go just below the middle. So I like to just slightly underexpose a photo. Now, don't get me wrong, every photo has its own atmosphere, its own energy, and you need to shoot for that. But when you're just starting out, you're more just trying to figure out how to get the right exposure. And for that purpose, make sure you go on your camera, turn the histogram on so you can see it on your LCD screen, and make sure you're using it in your post-editing software as well. Tip number 2, sharpness. Sharpness can be very frustrating when you start using a DSLR or mirrorless camera. When you're using your cell phone, typically sharpness isn't too much of a problem unless you have a moving scene. You see a lot of people post images on their Facebook or Instagram of, them running, or there's motion in the scene. It just isn't sharp. And a great photograph is sharp. Let's put it like this. A great photograph is sharp in the area of the subject. Now, when you get outside of the subject for the background, foreground, or whatever, it's your preference as far as whether you want to blur that out with bokeh or whatever. But you want to make sure that your subject is tack sharp. And there's a couple of ways to make sure that you do that. And without diving into them too deep, I just want to let you know what my thoughts are on those specific items that help you get better sharpness. And the number one thing is a tripod. Especially when you're starting out, you need a tripod. I know it seems like a burden. You got to carry it around. You got to have it off the side of your bag. It's just bulky, but get a smaller tripod. Get a lightweight, smaller tripod. It needs to be able to stand up to about your chin. Anything higher than that, it's usually not needed. Although there are some purposes when you want to stand your tripod up tall, or at least a better chance of getting a tack sharp image, because your subject could still be moving. There could be other dynamics going on with the scene. But if you're on a tripod, you're going to have the best chances of getting a sharp photograph. The next part of getting a sharp image is shutter speed. And shutter speed is something you have to master in order to really, really nail down your photography. You have to know what shutter speed to use and when. And to be honest with you, the only way to learn it is to do it and practice with it. And what I encourage is to use multiple different shutter speeds whenever you're out shooting. Whenever you have motion, you want to have a very, very fast shutter speed, like 1/1000. If you want to stop somebody when they're running, if you want to get a bird, so you have all the detail mid-flight, you're going to need a really high shutter speed, 1/3000 or something like that. And contrastly, sometimes you want slower shutter speeds. If you're shooting a waterfall, a lot of times you want that creamy, silky, smooth looking water. Then you need to slow that shutter speed down so that the sensor is open to light longer. And what that does is it kind of blurs out the details in the water and makes it nice and smooth and silky. But you won't get a tack sharp image when your shutter speed is open longer, because what it's doing is anything that's moving is kind of blurring because the shutter is open for so long. Anything that's not moving, you can usually get a pretty sharp image with slower shutter speeds. Slower shutter speed is also going to give you more light. And so you got to balance that exposure triangle with your ISO and your f-stop and your shutter speed. But you need to be aware that your shutter speed has a tremendous effect on whether or not your image is going to be sharp. So make sure you learn how to use your shutter speed appropriately. One of the ways I really step up my game on sharp photos is by shooting in low light, because it's so much harder to get sharp focus in low light. Your camera struggles a little bit with that. So if you want to really have a great exercise on getting sharp photos, is go in low light situations, sunrise, sunset, blue hour, and then work on getting that, that sharpness, that crisp sharpness, that fine edge when you're in those kind of conditions, and it'll just make you a much better photographer. For a sharp focus, for a lot of landscape photographers, the problem becomes the scene is so big. And so you really need to keep a f-stop around 11. Most cameras are sharpest right in that area, that f11. That's where you get the most sharpness from front to back. Now, sometimes if the scene is deep, you have something real close that you want in focus and something way in the background, like some mountains. Sometimes you need to focus stack, and that's a whole nother video, but it's where you take a couple of different exposures. One focused on the foreground, one on the midground, and then one on the background. And what you do is in post-editing or post-processing, you bring them together and kind of bring out or reveal the parts of each photograph that are absolutely in focus. And Lightroom and Photoshop have some automated tools for that. But usually you get the best results when you put them in Photoshop as layers and then do it yourself. Tip number 3 kind of piggybacks off my last tip, and that is anytime you're going out, shoot the same scene from the same perspective. Don't move the camera, but with different settings. Take your shutter speed a little faster, slow it down on the next photo, then change your f-stop, see what it looks like with a blurry background. You want to make sure your image is still properly exposed, but you usually have 1, 2, maybe 3 stops of light. That's stretching it a little bit, but you usually have some to play with there. It's all about balancing that exposure triangle. But what you want to do is take multiple exposures until you know, all right, I'm in a waterfall. I know the shutter speed should be this in order to get this type of image. So you want to play with your shutter speed, go up a stop, down a stop, same thing with f-stop, and then use your ISO to kind of balance out the exposure triangle. A circular polarizer. If you've ever had a pair of polarized glasses, what you notice is that the lights are more, or the colors are more intense. And as soon as you put them on, you see just a little bit of difference. You're not sure what it is, but the glare is gone from water, or it's much more improved anyway. You can see kind of through the glare. If you've ever done any fishing, polarized glasses are mandatory. And that's because you can put them on and you can look and you could almost like you can see underwater. That's because the glare is gone from the surface of the water. Polarized glasses make the colors you see so much deeper and more saturated. And so that is a great thing about a circular polarizer for your camera. It doesn't have to be the most expensive one, but you definitely want a fairly decent one because your image is going through it. And if you have a really cheap one, it's just not going to be the best image. So make sure you get a pretty decent, but not over the top circular polarizer. And another benefit of having a circular polarizer, it protects your lens. One of the first catastrophes I had with any camera was when the camera got blown over by wind and it fell on the lens, and I didn't have a polarizer on there and it cracked the lens. I've had the exact same thing happen with the circular polarizer, and the circular polarizer was damaged and pretty much unusable, but the camera and the lens were fine. So circular polarizer is a great investment. The last thing is more of a general concept, and I've done a video on this, but you hear so many times gear doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what kind of camera you have. It doesn't matter, how good your circular polarizer is. It doesn't matter how good your tripod is. All these things, all that matters is that you go do it. I'm here to report to you that is absolutely false. It is false. I don't care what anyone says. Gear matters. If gear didn't matter, all the people that are saying gear doesn't matter wouldn't have the nice gear, and it's one of those things. It's one of those things that the concept or the principle behind the message gear doesn't matter is a great one, because really it's just encouraging people, just get out there and do it. Just get out there and do it. And that's the number one thing. Nothing else matters if you're not out there doing it. What good is all the knowledge if you're not out practicing? So in that sense, they're right. And, I can appreciate that. But for beginners, you're just grasping, trying to find whatever you can to up your game. What do I need to do next? How do I get better? What's the next step? And my point is, gear matters. I started with a Canon M3, or no, M5. It wasn't M5. No, M3. Gear matters. Now, I moved from the M3 to the Canon 80D. And it was like night and day difference. If anyone wants to tell me there's not a difference between those cameras and gear doesn't matter with those, I will take that bet and show you for a fact gear matters. It does. And when I went from the Canon 80D, which is a great camera both for stills and for video, I moved up to the Canon EOS R. And the EOS R took it to a whole nother level. I only had about 6 extra megapixels. But, there's many years difference between the release of the 80D and the EOS R. And technology, it's not just the megapixels you're looking at. It's the overall build of the camera and the sensor and full frame versus micro four thirds. Or, it matters. It really matters. And if you're looking to see a next step, and you know that you've done everything you can do where you are, or at least it feels like it, sometimes it makes a big difference to jump up in gear, and it has for me. The Canon EOS R is much, much better than the Canon 80D. You can visually see it right on the computer. And I can tell you with prints, I have prints from both cameras. The 80D looked great. The EOS R looked professional. And it's that much of a, difference. It got me to the next step. So no matter what it is we're talking about, understand the principle behind the message that gear doesn't matter is for good intent. It means nothing if you're not out there doing it. And that's the number one thing. That's the number one thing. You got to get out there and do it. And if you're not doing it, gear doesn't matter. However, once we cross that off and we just assume that your passion is there and you're out there doing it, gear matters. When you need to take that next step, gear matters. And also look at maybe skipping a step, because investments like this can be very expensive when we're talking camera bodies and lenses. Gear matters. Gear matters with lenses. Big difference between lenses. Some lenses are just average lenses. It's a night and day difference when you compare the photographs that come out of a kit lens compared to a high-end lens. I think you should be spending as much money on your lenses almost as you're spending on your camera body, to be honest with you. And you're going to get amazing results with that because gear matters. I really appreciate you sticking around for the whole video. I'm just trying to give you the lessons that I had to learn the hard way. And so that maybe you can skip some of those lessons and progress a little more smoothly, a little faster, and get to that next step where you can be proud of the work that you're doing and feel inspired to get out there and do it. So I encourage you to share this video with your family, your friends. Leave me a like down below. That will help me grow the channel. And put it on your social media walls, your Facebook page, your Twitter page. Help me reach more people so I can share my message of the lessons that I had to learn the hard way as a self-taught photographer who's transitioning from beginner into intermediate. And maybe you guys don't have to learn some of those lessons the hard way. So I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see you on the next video.